Every new day, we get a chance to set the record straight. A clean slate. The opportunity to choose greatness and to stop making excuses. Motivation is cheap. Discipline is difficult. But discipline gets results. Your mindset matters. My name is Miles Biggs, and this is Relish the Journey. All right, I call this episode a look back on the journey, because that's essentially what I was asked for. So shout out to Trevor Calabro for this recording request. I actually interviewed Trevor on a different podcast of mine for my day job at Mojo Active. The podcast is called Integrate and Conquer. It's all about marketing and those in the field and what they're doing. So you can go over there and check out Trevor's episode. But for Relish the Journey, Trevor said that he'd like to hear more about the nuts and bolts of the original overall strategy behind Relish the Journey and how that's evolved through the journey. For example, what were my expectations, ambitions, and goals before I started? How have those things changed from then until now? What did I accurately plan for? Maybe what things went way wrong or that I got way wrong? And what would I do differently now that I have a bunch of experience? And any unforeseen benefits, takeaways, learnings, etc. So I call all that a look back on the journey. So first, Trevor, thank you. Very insightful question, series of questions, really. And I really appreciate the prompt and the exercise it's forced me to reflect on. So some context for those of you that may not have been listening, all the way back to episode 1, which I recorded, the very beginning of 2018 and released in April of 2018. So Relish the Journey started as an idea and a long series of notes in my phone in the end of 2017. It was a moment in life where I had a lot going on. So my wife and I had just sold our house, first house. We were building our second house, but it wasn't quite done yet. So we were moving into a one-bedroom apartment, and she was 8 months pregnant. And so we moved all of our stuff into a mix of a storage unit and this one-bedroom apartment. Brought the dog and a bunch of boxes into the apartment. She was 8 months pregnant. We were supposed to be there for 1 month. We were there for 3. We were supposed to be able to bring the baby home into our new house. We brought it home to this apartment and then moved again. It was a serious time of upheaval. So why not add a podcast to the mix, right? But at that time, we didn't have TV or internet because we were only going to be there for a month. And why would we get a contract for that period of time, right? So my main source of entertainment was a podcast, or podcasts to be specific. I listened to a lot of podcasts, read a lot of books, reading a lot of business books, self-help books, the same kind of podcasts. And I was fairly new to podcasts and was seeming to find only the big heavy hitters, guys like Gary Vaynerchuk and Tony Robbins, and shows like The Art of Charm, and big personalities like Bobby Bones, all great people. And at the time, I felt like there was something missing, was like the everyday man in his voice, and not the person who already reached success, but was clawing tooth and nail to realize success, and what that podcast would be like. And so that's what I set out for Relish the Journey to be. I wanted to interview people that were in the middle of the journey and hadn't yet reached the destination. That was the original goal. So I started a guest list in my phone of everyone I knew in my life that was doing some cool stuff. I started interviewing family and friends, and first 20, 25 episodes were a mix of cousins and my sisters, my parents, fraternity brothers. And I'm very grateful to those people because at that time I was literally just calling them out of the blue, asking if I can record a phone call because I was starting a podcast that they couldn't even listen to yet. And I had a whole questionnaire of set questions. I would do a little bullshitting and how I knew them, and then I'd say, okay, now we're going to go to the RTJ questionnaire. First question, what is your name? Which I had already been talking to this person, and we had covered their name, right? So if I could go back and do anything different, Trevor, it would be from day one, be a little bit more loose. But I really had to go through that. I had to learn that lesson and do it a weird way for a while to understand and find my style. So I don't really regret it. It's just funny for me to listen back to some of those original episodes and how robotic I was. So that was the original thought, and it's morphed because as I have grown, the show has grown. It started out, I guess, where I was in my journey, right? I was at the beginning of realizing I wanted more, and I was going to claw tooth and nail. And as I've clawed tooth and nail and rose rungs on the ladder, achieved new things, the circle of influence around me has changed, and therefore the people I have access to be guests on the show has changed. So went from just being my friends from college and my family members to people I was interacting with online who were also creating content and having podcasts or doing speaking engagements and things that I was now doing, getting them on the show. Then they would say, oh, you got to talk to this person. They're doing something really cool, you know? And then it was just fits of luck. But I reached out to a woman who was running a really cool looking nonprofit in Arizona, and turns out she freaking won Chopped. And I had no idea when I asked her to be on the show. And then I have that as a feather in my cap to say I talked to somebody that won Chopped, right? So yeah, shout out Joy Bus and Jennifer Caraway. Check out that episode from season 1. So that's how it's evolved, right? Is as I've grown, the show has grown. And so I'm very thankful, and I talk about this all the time, that I picked a vague title like Relish the Journey, because as I look back on it as a sort of time capsule of who I am, it's a real cool roadmap of what's going on in my life, and that's reflected by how I show up in interviews and even the people that I'm interviewing. So the original strategy was to interview the everyday man who was a nobody, and as I've evolved, first, I'm not saying I'm somebody, but as I have access to more somebodies and I get to do more cool things, I'm getting those people on the show, and it's increasing, you know, the caliber of the guest. So the next thing you asked was what things that I accurately planned for. So I just mentioned the name. I think accurately planned for the equipment. I tested some equipment, but then just went all in on some upgrades that have proved to be very, very good. And so I'm glad I planned for that. And then even in hindsight, the house I built, right? I have a little extra room for my own in-house studio. And so that's been helpful to keep things consistent. Let's see. What would I do differently? Not have much of experience. So, see, this is a hard one for me because I've said before, I'm not really a regrets guy, or I don't believe I could go back and do things differently because then I wouldn't have the experience I have now in order to go back and do things differently. It's kind of like a little bit of an Inception type thing, right? But I would say in general, what I realized is that I was kind of wrong. Not kind of wrong. I was wrong when I first started, and I was kind of calling out some of the big names, saying that all they did was talk to millionaires. But what I've realized is that that's just their circles. You know, if you are that high caliber person, you end up being surrounded by those high caliber people, and that's who you talk to. That's who you relate to. So that's who you have on your podcast. And so I think my initial mindset was a little bit off, but it was accurate for where I was at the time. And I just have a new perspective on it right now compared to where I was when I started this thing. So unforeseen benefits, takeaways, and learning, I'll end it here, is, man, I had no idea that starting a podcast would be sort of like a weekly journal for myself, a bit of like a therapy session, and the amount of personal and professional growth that would come out of it, I had no idea. I thought it would just be a little bit of hobby, and that'd be it. And now here I am. I've got a TED Talk later in 2020. I'm wrapping up a book. I've got all sorts of other speaking engagements. I really believe that the podcast is sort of what led me to my current job at a marketing agency, and now I've started a second podcast for that marketing agency. You know, I've got my own LLC called Big's Ideas, where I'm channeling some of what I'm exposed to with these high caliber guests and just my creative mind into some consulting and coaching services for people. Never would have guessed that all of that would come from starting a podcast. So it's really been a great ride, and it's hard to believe for me that I started the idea in 2017 and it's 2020 right now, and I am, you know, approaching 150 episodes, 200 episodes here on this show, and over 50 in the other one. So as a podcaster, I've done well over 200 episodes. That's wild for me to say, but I did it, and it's one of those things where I just show up every week, put my head down, and put the work in. And the more I do it, the more I love it, the more I grow. And that's what it's always been about for me. It's not been about the stats or the downloads. It's just been something I like to do, and I see the direct benefit as a human. And so I keep doing it, and I'll keep doing it until I guess I don't see that, and then I'll stop and do something else. So, Trevor, hopefully that answers your question and what you're looking for. Hopefully that gives you all some context, I guess, to who I am and why I do this. And I really appreciate you all for listening so much, because it's cool to know that there's somebody on the other end of the microphone I'm talking into every time I get on here and do this. So Appreciate you all. And until next time, cheers.